Welcome to The Explainer. If you're a student of business, you've probably wondered about one of the biggest questions out there. How does a company go from being a local favorite to a global powerhouse? Well, today, we're diving into the playbook for taking a business global. We're going to focus on the critical choices that can make or break that expansion.
It all kicks off with one single massive decision. How do you actually enter a new country? And this isn't just about, shipping a product. It's a really complex strategic choice. It involves some major trade-offs between risk, control, and how much you're willing to commit. If you get this right, you're on your way. But get it wrong? Ooh, that can be a seriously costly mistake. Okay, so let's get into it. Before a single product even crosses a border, every company has to think about a handful of fundamental factors that are going to define their entire international game plan. Choosing how to enter a market is a total balancing act. You've got to juggle how much money and management time you're willing to pour in, how much control you absolutely need to have, and how much risk you can stomach. And this decision, it's always shaped by two big things: what the company has on the inside, like cash and expertise, and what the market looks like on the outside, local laws and culture. So how do companies actually figure all this out? Well, the most successful ones, they don't just wing it. Nope, they follow a very clear, very strategic roadmap to guide them on their journey. Let's take a look at this roadmap here. It kicks off with market research, then it moves into entry mode selection, risk mitigation, implementation, and finally measuring and optimizing. Now, every single one of these phases is absolutely crucial, but for our purposes, we're going to zoom right in on that really pivotal second step, choosing your entry mode. Okay, this is where the strategy really comes to life. I want you to think of these different entry modes as different vehicles for your global journey. Some are kind of like just dipping a toe in the water, while others are like diving in head first. So the most common starting point for a lot of companies is exporting. It makes sense, right? It's a pretty low-cost, low-risk way to just test the waters in another country and see if your product actually has an audience. But what's the trade-off? You have very, very little control over how your product is actually marketed and sold over there. All right, next up we have licensing. This lets you get into a market super fast with almost no investment. You're basically renting out your brand name or your tech to a local partner. Sounds great, but there's a huge catch. You risk losing control over your secret sauce, your intellectual property, and you might even be training your biggest future competitor. Then on the complete other end of the spectrum, you've got foreign direct investment, or FDI. This is the all-in option. We're talking about building or buying your own factories and offices in another country. It gives you the absolute maximum level of control and the highest potential profits. But yep, you guessed it. It also comes with the biggest financial and political risks. Now, this slide here is fantastic because it lays out the fundamental trade-off we've been talking about so clearly. Just look at it. As you go down the list from exporting to FDI, you can see a straight line. To get more control, you absolutely have to take on more risk and commit way more resources. There's just no shortcut. But what if you want more control than just exporting, but you're not quite ready to take the massive leap into full-blown FDI? What if you could share that risk? Well, that's where strategic alliances and specifically joint ventures enter the picture. A joint venture, it's basically a business marriage. It's when two totally separate companies agree to create a brand new third company to go after a specific market or project together. They pool their money, their know-how, and their resources to share both the risks and, hopefully, the rewards. And just like any marriage, there are pros and cons. On the plus side, you get instant access to local market knowledge, you get to split the massive costs, and you basically double your resources. But on the flip side, you have to share control and you have to share the profits, which you can imagine can lead to some serious disagreements over strategy. And these pros and cons, they're not just theoretical stuff in a textbook. They play out in the real world for some of the biggest companies on the planet. I mean, take Starbucks. They had the coffee know-how, but PepsiCo had this massive bottling and distribution network. By forming a joint venture, they were able to get those bottled Frappuccinos into convenience stores everywhere, something neither of them could have done as easily by themselves. Now, it's super important to understand the difference between this and a formal partnership. A joint venture is usually set up for one specific, often temporary goal, like launching a single product line. A formal partnership, on the other hand, is meant to be a permanent thing, running a whole business together for the long haul. So one's a project, the other's a permanent union. Okay, so we've looked at all these different paths, from just exporting to FDI to joining forces in a joint venture. After all that, what is the one key thing you need to walk away with as you study global business? The most crucial point is this. There is no single best way to enter a foreign market. It just doesn't exist. The right choice is always, always the one that best lines up with a company's specific goals, its resources, and the reality of the market it's trying to enter. A strategy that's a home run in a culturally similar country might be a complete disaster somewhere with huge regulatory hurdles. Context, truly, is everything.
And that leaves us with one final thought. As technology keeps blurring borders and global culture keeps changing, the playbook we've just talked about is constantly being updated. The winning strategies of today might not be the winning strategies of tomorrow. So the real question, especially for the next generation of business leaders like you, is what's next?